Last time, we explored a way to solve cryptarithms using brute force computation. The essential idea was to think of possible solutions to these puzzles as ways of mapping letters to digits. We represented these mappings as permutations of the digits with respect to some ordering of the letters. Furthermore, we showed that if a solution existed, it corresponded to a permutation. Combining all of these, we solved our cryptarithm by having a computer check all the possible permutations. Now, as is the case with most programming problems, coming up with an idea is very different from actually implementing it. With that said, how do we begin translating our ideas into code? To start, I want to make it clear that there isn't a singular correct approach. Programmers are often given descriptions of requirements, but are otherwise free to choose their own implementations. A natural starting point, then, is to think about how we want to be able to interact or interface with our program. This is Steve. Steve is a very serious program. All Steve wants to do is solve cryptarithms. From our perspective, it would be nice to be able to feed Steve a cryptarithm and have him churn out a set of solutions. I don't want to keep saying cryptarithms, so henceforth I will refer to them as puzzles. Now, because Steve is serious, anytime we feed him a puzzle, he will studiously find all the solutions. And with that, believe it or not, we've defined an interface. As a programmer, I want to be able to take a cryptarithm, represent it as a puzzle, and then feed it to our solver Steve. How Steve solves the puzzle isn't particularly important to us yet, because our first job is to figure out how to give Steve his desired puzzles. As we've learned, we use classes to represent objects in software. With this in mind, what attributes do we need to capture the structure of a puzzle? It might be helpful to consider a specific example of a cryptarithm, or, in the language of objects, an instance of a puzzle. Looking at this, two main things pop out to me. All the terms above the equality line, me and me, are added together to get the result B. In that case, does it make sense for each puzzle to have, say, a list of terms? We choose a list because we don't know how many terms each puzzle has. For example, the first cryptarithm that we showed had 3 terms, 40, 10, and 10. On the other hand, each puzzle has a single result, so we can just use a normal string. Now, we could include the plus operator, but I'm going to go ahead and ignore that for the time being. All the puzzles we've worked with so far have added the terms together, so the plus can be implicitly included. If you wanted to, you could extend support for different operators, such as minus, times, division, whatever you want. How to represent that in code or as a data type is left as an exercise to you. Now, that was the easy part. Defining the attributes for a solver is going to be somewhat trickier. To start, let's reference our interface. As we've defined it, Steve should be fed a puzzle to solve. This means our solver has access to the terms and result that we use to represent our puzzle. Alright, how do we proceed from here? Well, the crucial insight from last time was that permutations correspond to possible solutions. The way we solved a puzzle was to basically try every permutation. That observation immediately tells us that Steve needs a way to generate permutations. For example, let's fix the unique letters we had in our last puzzle. Me plus me equals B has the letters M, E, and B. Let's assign the standard ordering of digits to these letters, 1, 2, and 3. Note that I'm only considering 1, 2, and 3 as possible digits. This is just because I don't want to write all 10 factorial permutations of the digits. Laziness aside, the permutations of 1, 2, 3 are 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 2, 2, 1, 3, 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, and 3, 2, 1. Alright, now that we have a way to generate permutations, we also need a way to map each permutation to the letters that they should substitute. In other words, it makes sense for Steve to have some way to map a permutation to a possible solution. For example, let's consider one of the permutations we just generated. As you recall, we chose the order for the unique letters of the puzzle to be M, E, and B. We want to use our chosen permutation as a map between letters and digits. The circled permutation 3, 2, 1 can be interpreted as assigning M to 3, E to 2, and B to 1. To recap, we defined two methods that Steve can use to solve cryptarithms. The first method should generate every possible permutation of the digits. The second method constructs a map from a single permutation by assigning the digits of the permutation to the letters that they should be substituted for. Note that this is different from our puzzle class, where the attributes were specific data types. Instead, the attributes that our solver has are functions. Remember, classes have their own data types, as well as their own methods. In the same way that it's natural for a puzzle to consist of a list of terms and a result, it should also be natural for Steve to have his own way of generating and mapping possible solutions. Functions can belong to objects too. All this is to say that we've equipped Steve with the ability to poop out permutations and maps. How do we translate that into finding actual solutions? Well, in order to try each permutation, we basically need to plug it in. Let's define a try-solution method that implements this idea. What we want this function to do is to take a possible solution and check if it corresponds to an actual numeric equality. In this case, checking can simply be plugging in all the digits for all the letters. As an example, let's try the solution encoded by the original permutation that we chose. The original puzzle was me plus me equals B. Our solution map tells us that M should be substituted for 3, E for 2, and B for 1. If we follow this mapping, we get the following statement. Unfortunately, this is not a valid solution. It would be a pretty wonky world we lived in if 32 plus 32 was equal to 122. However, Steve isn't discouraged. This was just one permutation, and Steve is a serious solver. If a permutation corresponding to a solution exists, you best believe Steve will find it. The last attribute that Steve needs in his toolkit is a general solve method. This function can tie everything together by generating all permutations, transforming them into solution maps, attempting each of these solutions, and lastly, keeping all solutions that yield equality. With just these 4 functions, each of them relatively straightforward, Steve now has everything he needs to solve the puzzles that we give him. Now that we've broken the problem down into discrete objects and manageable functions, we can dive into the code I wrote. To be clear, I don't expect all of you to fully understand every line I've written. I used Python Voodoo here and there to make my code more concise, and we haven't taught you most of these tricks. However, as you become more experienced Python programmers, hopefully the more expressive lines will become clear. With that said, here are some explanations for some of the more arcane statements. So, within the puzzle class, I've defined an initializer/constructor that saves the terms and results associated with the puzzle. This function essentially makes one big string of all the letters in the puzzle, and then removes the duplicates by turning the big string into a set. This function is responsible for taking a permutation and creating a solution map. The way I've chosen to represent these maps in Python is via dictionaries. As a reminder, dictionaries allow us to associate keys to values. In this case, I'm associating letters to digits. The for loop, in this case, is iterating over pairs of letters and numbers, which are conveniently zipped together in order. Creating the solution map is as simple as associating every letter with every digit. This function is the trickiest of the bunch. It's responsible for plugging in digits for letters according to a solution map, and then checking if the resulting equation is true. The first step is to replace all the letters in the puzzle with numbers. To do this, I've defined a mini function that helps apply the mapping prescribed by the solution. I then call this function on every term and result in the puzzle. Next up is checking if the replaced puzzle is a valid solution. As you recall, for a solution to be valid, the equation must be true, and there must be no leading zeros. To check for leading zeros, I'm asking if any of the first digits of each term are 0 for each term in the puzzle. Lastly, I'm checking if the final equation is true by looking at the arithmetic expression of the puzzle, expressed as a string. Notice that this is a valid Python statement, i.e., if I type this into Python, it would display either true or false. By calling eval on this string, I'm asking Python to treat the string as a command and return the value of that statement. If the equation actually holds, this solution is valid, and eval appropriately returns true. If the equation is false, however, eval will correctly return false. And with that, I've defined a function to verify a solution corresponding to a permutation. The general solve method follows rather straightforwardly. I just call try solution on every permutation, keeping all the solutions that are valid. I want to emphasize that the actual Python code shouldn't be the focus of this video. The main takeaways I want you to have are 1. Objects can clarify how ideas should be translated into code. And 2. Breaking problems down into more manageable functions can simplify programming. I'll conclude this video with an exercise for the diligent viewer. How would you change your code translation to accommodate known digits? For example, in the original 40 plus 10 plus 10 equals 60 puzzle, we figured out pretty quickly that n has to be 0, e has to be 5, I has to be 1, and o has to be 9. Can you modify our class decomposition to support passing in letter-digit pairs that don't need to be permuted?